We have a great question here from a long-time subscriber called Tudor, who has a question about the market's reaction towards some incoming vaccine news from both Moderna and Pfizer recently. And Tudor's asking, why didn't the market continue to move higher on these positive vaccine news events? In both circumstances, we had a push to the upside and a pullback, a push to the upside and a pullback. And he just wants a little bit more explanation of why we think that might have been the case. So thanks for the question. I think in these two situations, it might have been a couple of factors playing out, some of them slightly different in these two moves, and we can look at each of them individually. So taking a look at that first one, on Monday, the 9th of November, we had the Pfizer release coming out saying that its vaccine, its phase 3 trial was 90% effective according to the preliminary results. And going into the news, we knew that vaccine news was going to be important. If I just quickly open up our daily risk event outlook reports, let's go back to the 9th. From a couple of weeks ago, what we've been explaining in terms of vaccine news was with the major increase that we've had, apart from the positive things that a vaccine would mean for the world and the economy, one of the reasons why a vaccine or vaccine news was back in focus was the election risks started to subside. And apart from that, with that new breakout in the virus, that massive resurgence and the renewed lockdown restrictions, there was added focus, of course, on vaccine news. So we knew that it was going to be front of mind. And after the news came out, we basically saw the market reacting the exact way that we would expect it to. Equities moved up across the board, apart from, of course, things like the NASDAQ, which moved lower, which was due to that rotation flows, which favored the battered down value and cyclical stocks as opposed to growth and momentum stocks. We saw bond yields popping higher as we would expect. We saw commodities like WTI, copper, all moving higher as one would expect. We saw on the currency side, safe havens moving lower, high betas moving higher, basically seeing exactly what we would have thought we would see from positive vaccine news. Now, looking at the pullback, that first one in a little bit more detail, I think there was two, in my opinion at least, two specific reasons which made a stronger pullback more likely after the move higher. The first reason was some caveats to the Pfizer vaccine, which did raise some concerns afterwards about its distribution, things like the temperature that was very, very low, also the shorter shelf life. So that probably added to the reasons for the pullback. But in my opinion, the more reasonable catalyst was just some simple mean reversion. I mean, equities had been rallying quite hard from a couple of sessions before the news came out, after the election jitter started to subside. And if we take a look at this histogram, which tracks the absolute value of certain equities on a weekly basis, we can see just the massive moves we had the week before that. So for me, the odds of mean reversion was already high going in before the news. So if we think about it that way, with the moves already elevated and stretched to the upside, with the equity markets already at key resistance areas and reaching new all-time highs, I think a lot of traders that was already long from the election, or from the results at least, I think a lot of those saw that massive spike to the upside just as a great opportunity to book some solid gains and to book some solid profit on those already long positions. So for me, this is really partly due to some of the caveats in the news, but mainly due to just some good old-fashioned mean reversion, some pullback, some profit taking from these higher levels. So moving on to yesterday's news, which was the Moderna one on 16 November, we had Moderna coming out. In many ways, the news was actually a lot more positive compared to the Pfizer news because the efficacy rate was higher. It's required to store at a lower temperature. It has a much higher shelf life. So, to your question, we saw the exact same move play out in both circumstances, with that first move to the upside and then a pullback, a first move to the upside and then a pullback. So let's take a look at the probable reasons why the market pulled back on the second occasion as well. Remember that the news was even more positive compared to the Pfizer news. So if we only looked at the news itself, we would have expected a much bigger news to that. So one possible reason could once again just be down to mean reversion. It's not uncommon for the market to retrace after seeing big jolts to the upside, either up or down. But more importantly, if we take a look at the charts, the markets basically ran into the exact same resistance areas that they ran into the previous Monday, and still trading at the same elevated price level. So it could be just down to that simple fact of looking at the same type of resistance, still elevated markets without really seeing a sustained correction. So, the type of reaction for me wasn't really the fact that both of them had a spike and a pullback and a spike and the pullback wasn't as interesting for me as the size of the moves itself. So if we take a look, like we said, the content of the Moderna news, if we just went on the content itself, it should have seen a much bigger move from the Moderna news. So, as we mentioned in today's daily risk event outlook report as well, the one thing that's important to keep in mind, to always remember, is that the market gets used to the same type of narrative or same type of story fairly quickly, which means that similar news might be, let's say, Johnson & Johnson comes out next week, also Monday, also with positive news. Any type of subsequent news releases can, with some conviction and reasonable expectation, be expected to see even less of a reaction if we see more positive results from other vaccines coming out in the race as well. And the reason for that is just because the markets get used to these types of news fairly quickly. So the next big move in terms of vaccine news will probably be news that one of these vaccines, whether it's Pfizer's or Moderna or whatever, has been submitted for the FDA approval. And then after that, I think the next big release after that will be news that either of those vaccines has actually been approved for distribution. And then after that, the next big one will probably be when the first batches get rolled out. So I think there's the fact that the size was a smaller reaction shows that the markets have already gotten used to that type of news. It's basically the same news. It's a different company, but it's the same narrative. So markets getting used to that same narrative. So there are reasons, in my opinion, at least, to explain the two moves. And it certainly does make sense and seem reasonable if you think about it. But, at the same time, I do want to mention and stress that the market doesn't always need a particular reason to do what it does, right? Of course, as traders who follow the fundamentals and sentiment, we want to know why things happen so that we can know whether price action might be sustainable or not, whether we can jump in or not. But there will be plenty of times when there will just be no real good, solid reasons for particular reactions in the market. And it might just be down to the regular ebbs and flows that we see in the markets on a daily basis. So for me, that at least explains some of it. But like I said, it might just be down to some normal ebbs and flows in the market. So I hope that helps with the question, Tudor. And as always, please let us know if there's any other questions.